Well, hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to this session for the final session of the day of the Alumni UK Live. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to a discussion on driving sustainable development and to be joined today by a fantastic panel of five UK alumni who have all been selected as Sustainable Development Goal Ambassadors for the impact that their work is making or has made. And we're going to have a fantastic discussion today about to dive into the issue of how can individuals make an impact to improve lives and to make a difference for sustainable development goals. My name is Andrew Chadwick. I am the director of the Chevening Scholarship Program Directorate. But today my role is to be the chair of this Alumni UK program session and to guide us through the session today. We'll introduce the panelists very shortly, but just before we do that and to start us off, I just wanted to put one poll on the screen to get us thinking about impact and the difference that people can make when we have an impact. So if we can have the first poll on the screen, please. And here's the poll for you if you're following along to think about who answered this. Who do you think this quote comes from? The quote is, "If you think you are too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito." And while you're answering that poll, I'm just going to give you a couple of housekeeping and attendance instructions. So the first thing is to say that captions are available. If you click on the captions button on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that you can get captions for this. There's a chat function which will be open or is open now. So please do introduce yourself on the chat and let us know where you're joining from in the world and maybe what you're interested in. And also please note that there's a separate Q&A, question and answer section where you can post questions as they occur to you during the session. And towards the end of the session, we'll have time to pick up and ask some of those questions that come in. So all questions and answers in the Q&A section of please, not in the chat section. And now back to our poll. So if we can end the poll and see what the results are. There we go. I suppose it's quite an even spread, slight favoritism for Nelson Mandela, but I can tell you that the answer that I found out for this is the Dalai Lama, apparently. The Dalai Lama said that it's if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. Who knew? Well, on that point, let's dive in and meet our five panelists who I'm delighted who've been able to join us. They come from all around the world, different countries around the world, and represent actually five different UK universities. I know that we have the universities of Glasgow, Nottingham, Swansea, London, Brunel, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, all represented as UK universities from our five panelists. So I'm going to introduce them in turn, ask them very briefly to say very quickly who they are and to give a brief introduction, to answer a question, to speak to the work they're doing. And I'm going to go first of all to Rowan. Rowan, I know that you have worked on an amazing project called The Girl from LinkedIn that is going to go live soon. Can you just tell us where does the idea from that come from and what is it?
Yes, sure. Hi, Andrew. It's lovely to be here. So, the girl from LinkedIn actually started as something very informal. It wasn't a project at first, it was a pattern. While I was navigating my own career, I kept getting messages from young people asking the same questions. How do I write a CV? Why am I not getting interviews? How do I access international opportunities? And I remember a few years back when I was working at the UN, I was once doing some paperwork at a police station, and I mentioned that I was leaving the country and a police officer asked me, "How did you start working at the UN?" So I grabbed a little post-it and a pen from my purse and I wrote some websites where she could apply. The information seemed incredibly obvious to me, but she didn't know it, and I thought, let me simply share it. And when I went home, I wrote a post on LinkedIn with the same information that I had given her. And that was the first post I had ever written on LinkedIn that went viral. The post was shared thousands of times, and I realized that information that was incredibly obvious to me was not obvious at all to others. And it was obvious to me only because I found the information through years of researching and applying myself. So from there, I started sharing practical step-by-step advice publicly on LinkedIn. And over time, it became sort of a joke that people started calling me the girl from LinkedIn. And what started out as posts, daily posts, turned into a community of now close to 60,000 people. In 2025 alone, my content reached 2.7 million viewers and over 58,000 professionals, which showed me that there was a real demand for structured, accessible career support. So I decided to build something more scalable through the support that I have been receiving from the British Council. I'll talk more about it through the presentation today, but briefly, the Girl from LinkedIn is a tool that has two components. The first component is an AI-powered career coaching workbook, a self-guided workbook where people can essentially coach themselves to find decent employment. And the second component is an AI tool that provides real-time personalized support. So essentially what I was doing manually, responding to dozens or hundreds of inquiries, this tool will be able to reach, let's say, thousands of people to reach the jobs of their dreams.
Great. Rowan, thank you so much for that introduction and for letting us and whetting our appetite about the product. For those of us, if you haven't been to it yet, it's time to go and have a look and check out the work that you've done there on that program. Thank you. I'll turn now to Salah. Salah, I know you're joining us from, I think, from Egypt. You have won a prestigious science prize in Egypt, for which many congratulations. And I know you've developed an edutech, an educational technology project to support people to use AI. Can you tell us how the idea of that project came about?
Thank you, first of all. I'm really happy to join this panel today. And I'm being honored really with last year Nile Prize in Science, which is one of Egypt's highest and most prestigious scientific awards. It was really a defining moment for me. It not only recognized years of research, but also placed a responsibility on me to ensure that science creates real impact in people's lives. This recognition made me reflect on true purpose of scientific achievements, not just advancing knowledge, but also making that knowledge accessible and useful to society as a whole. The idea for EduTech was shaped by this recognition and responsibility. At that time, through our various AI training programs, where we engaged over 4,000 participants, alongside initiatives supported by the British Council, I noticed something very, very important. There is a strong curiosity and enthusiasm about AI among people from all backgrounds, yet many feel excluded from it. This gap inspired the creation of EduTech. The project is built on the idea of democratization of AI, making it understandable, practical, and relevant to everyday needs and everyday lives, especially for undeserved groups and such as workers, housewives, and many others, young people, and so on. A key part of this vision is also promoting gender equality. We want young women not only to learn AI, but to see themselves as future leaders in this field and others. That's why we designed a dedicated accelerator to support and mentor girls. Ultimately, EduTech came from a simple belief that AI should be a tool for empowerment, not exclusion. By making it accessible, we can reduce inequalities, support community health, and promote a more sustainable future for them.
Thank you so much, Salah, for giving that introduction to the work you've done. And we hear yet again AI coming through strongly, the importance of AI and how that can make a difference.
Yes,
I think we might hear more about that later on in this session.
sure.
I'll turn now to Urvashi, our third panelist. Urvashi, your work is inspirational as you've looked at invisible cancers in the area of healthcare, invisible cancers affecting younger people, and you've advocated for policy changes. What led you to become aware of the problem and decide to do something about it?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for your question and pleasure to be here. So I came to this work through two intersecting routes. I am a trained public health professional, but I'm also someone living with stage 4 ALK positive lung cancer myself. And I was diagnosed at 35 years of age. Young adult cancers are what I call invisible cancers, not because they don't exist, but because our health systems are designed around the extremes of age when it comes to cancer. Children have dedicated pathways, older adults are the assumed phase of cancer, but young adults, people who are between, say, 18 to 45 years of age, fall through the gap. And they are diagnosed late because neither they nor their clinicians expect it. And they also face many disruptions that maybe older people wouldn't, in terms of careers being interrupted, fertility being threatened, and really the grief of a life derailed at precisely the moment it was getting started. So, my training at Birmingham, Cambridge, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine gave me the analytical tools to understand these gaps structurally. But it was my own diagnosis combined with working directly with patients and with India's premier policy think tank on health reform that made it impossible to look away. When you sit with the data and also with the people behind the data, inaction stops being an option. And so the work is both deeply personal and deeply structural. And I've come to believe that's not a contradiction. In fact, that combination of lived experience meeting rigorous evidence is exactly what makes advocacy credible enough to change policy.
Well, thank you very much, Urvashi. Thank you so much for sharing that and combining in your own personal story there with your research and professional interest. It's a very strong testimony. Let's turn to our fourth panelist. No, CJ. CJ, you're joining us, I think, from Singapore. I think your work also involves an element of advocacy as you work to get voice-marginalized people, young women, represented in the Singaporean Youth Plan. And you've also got UK-based alumni involved in the process. Can you tell us why you decided to involve alumni in the work that you were doing and how that contributed to your project?
Absolutely, Andrew. So I think a great thing about being an SDG ambassador with British Council is we really had the chance to really amplify our impact through the networks and resources that we have, and this appointment just really accelerates what we want to achieve. So how it really came up is at that time I was working in the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, and I've always been active in the youth division. And I think it makes total sense for me to use my role as SDG 5 ambassador to create a collaboration between the ministry and the British Council Singapore. Oftentimes when we hear about gender equality issues, women's voices are often undermined, and particularly in this case where we have female youths who might not be staying in Singapore, right? Who are Alumni UK members and feel already very out of touch with policy issues. So what we are essentially trying to do is not just to promote better gender equity, but also to promote more visibility within the community of Alumni UK. So it makes total sense that this collaboration allow a lot of Singaporean students, and a lot of them are young girls and women who are residing in the UK or who have just come back to Singapore after their studies from the UK, and to really contribute to their voices in terms of, what are the policies that they really want to see a change, and to really ensure that their voices are being part of the plan in the first place, And what's really amazing as well, Andrew, is that we have a panel where we have Alumni UK winners, like Study UK winners, who are women, telling them, what they can achieve through the ecosystem, and how they should go from 0 to 1, essentially. And this also led to this amazing outreach where I was able to find like-minded individuals from the Alumni UK system, where I found, female UK graduates who are working in charities supporting young women and girls, and we are collaborating together despite the difference in our UK university. And we are, bringing up our resources together to promote a lot of issues that are often less talked about. Things like, how do we promote more accessibility to things like essential wear for women from lower income households, right? Or what is exactly, some of the things that women from lower income households don't often talk about because they're too embarrassed or too ashamed, to share that they need these essential items, and really putting that into actionable impact, and to have real policymakers like our politicians being there and listening and really putting it into parliament. So this is truly amazing.
Well, CJ, thank you so much. Another great example of working with advocacy and or sort of raising the voice, speaking on and enabling people to speak with their voice and collaborating across a large group of people. Thank you for that. And finally, we'll turn to finally on our panelist, our fifth panelist for today, and then we'll launch some questions. Our fifth panelist is Atia. Atia, you've worked on inclusive and sustainable education practices in Azerbaijan's Institute of Education. So can you tell us what are sustainable education practices and why are they so important?
Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be part of the panel. And sustainable education is about recognizing that every person has a right to quality learning, no matter their backgrounds or their ethnicities, and the financial situation. And honestly, my own journey is a testimony to that. I graduated from a world-class university and have spent nearly 2 years as an SDG ambassador, speaking or organizing more than 10 events with the British Council. And I have done all of this while doing my primary work at the Institute of Education. So I've seen it firsthand that sustainable education is what ensures fairness and equity. It is about making sure that resources are available to those who did not necessarily inherit them, but should be able to find them along the way. And I care deeply about this because I personally experience how socioeconomic barriers can limit access to opportunities. I wouldn't be where I am today without specific sustainable interventions. If it were not for government scholarship opportunity or the call for the application from the British Council to become an ambassador, my professional path would have looked very different. I, in fact, did not pay a single dime for any of these opportunities. And in some cases, I was actually paid for my work. Yet the impact of them in my professional life, in my career, was immense. And because of this, I believe education practices only truly become sustainable when those who benefits, like myself or young professionals or students, take that investment and give it back to our communities. Yes, the systems and the governments are at the core of everything. They are responsible for actually making education sustainable. However, I've noticed that in most cases, it is responsibility of passionate individuals working directly with others to ensure that inclusive education functions effectively in the practice, in reality, rather than remaining only on paper.
Thank you, Atia. Thank you so much for giving that introduction to your work. So it's lovely to meet you as panelists, and thank you very much, first of all, for joining today. We're going to dive in now to a bit of a discussion about the four Sustainable Development Goals that are sort of the topics for today's focus. Just before we do that, well, I'll read out what the four SDGs are. But if we can have the second poll up and ask everybody who's joining us online just to give us a sense of what you're interested in or what your connection with the SDGs are. And the four SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that we're looking at today are about the first is reduced inequalities. The second one is quality education. The third one is gender inequality. And the fourth one is decent work and economic growth. But if you could just let us know roughly if you're sort of on the poll, if you work on these areas, if you're a practitioner, a student, or if you're simply an interested individual who has no direct connection but follows with interest the topic. And we'll just end the poll there, please, and just see where we've got to with the results. So I can see from looking at that, we've got an interesting spread. Perhaps a third of people on the call on the today's session are practitioners. About another third are either students or work directly, and then just over a third are just have a general interest in the topic. So it's a good range of experience, if you like, and engagement with the topics. So let's dive into the first of the Sustainable Development Goals and look at reduced inequalities. And this is some questions really focused particularly on with Salah and Urvashi for your work. I'll turn to Salah first of all, but it's the same question really for both of you, because both of your work focuses on addressing inequalities in different contexts. Based on your experience, can you just tell us what are the most pressing forms of inequality affecting communities today, and how can initiatives at a local level create more inclusive opportunities? Salah, would you like to take that?
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, in my work over the past years, I have come to see inequality in multiple dimensions, not just economic, but educational, digital, and gender-based, and how these gaps can limit opportunities for entire communities. One of the most pressing forms of inequality that we are facing today is access to quality education and technology. In many communities, especially in Africa and parts of the Middle East, young people and adults simply do not have the tools or opportunities to participate in the digital economy. This is not only about computers or internet access, it is more than this. It is about skills, confidence, mentorship, and pathways to meaningful jobs. This understanding has led me to initiatives like UNESCO Participation Fund program, and in that I have put a program called Advanced Photonics Training Programs for African grad students, in short, Africans. The goal of this program was to give African adult and grad students the hands-on training needed in photonics in a field that supports many other modern technologies. By providing access to high-level scientific education, we help people and students in general from underrepresented regions to overcome not only skill gap, but also the broader barriers and often limit the participation in research and innovation. Building on that, our Women in Science Empowering in Artificial Intelligence, or in short, WISE AI project that was supported thankfully by my UNESCO chair and also by the British Council, has tackled another critical sector of equality, reducing the gender gap in AI and technology. WISE AI provided training, workshops, and community programs to inspire and support women in AI. It helps them build practical skills, connect with mentors and each other, and access real career opportunities in technology, giving women the chance to succeed and lead in a field where they have long been underrepresented in.
Okay. Thank you, Salah. Thank you for that. I'm interested. We might come back to this about some of the points you make about skills and confidence and the importance of mentorship. Maybe we'll return to some of those topics later. But Urvashi, it's the same question really for you as well, of course, from your health perspective, which is your area. Again, for you, what are the most pressing forms of inequality, and how do initiatives at local level help to create more inclusive opportunities?
Yeah, I think if I draw on my work across public health, public policy, the development sector more broadly, the inequalities I keep returning to are, of course, income, gender, but also spatial and urban rural divides, and of course, increasingly digital inequality. And of course, rarely do these operate in isolation. And if I take the example that I was just speaking of earlier, which is young adult cancer as a lens, and if I take the context of India, where I come from, a young person presenting with the same diagnosis in a metropolitan hospital with private insurance will have a fundamentally different prognosis than someone in a smaller city or a rural area. The disease is identical. The inequality in every system surrounding it, whether it's awareness, whether it's referral pathways, affordability of treatment, and even peer support, makes all the difference. Gender, of course, cuts through all of this. Women living with cancer face social disruption, marital disruption, abandonment linked to fertility loss, or visible changes like hair loss. Employment discrimination affects people across genders, but the social consequences of illness fall disproportionately on women. Then environmental inequality in the same context is also very strong and often underappreciated. We have pollution from cooking fuels, we have industrial emissions, contaminated water, and these exposures directly map closely onto geography and income. So, who lives, near the industrial estate? Who cooks on an open fire? These are inequality questions, not just environmental ones. And local initiatives obviously make a transformative difference in closing the trust gap that national policy alone cannot close. And so, staying with this example, patient navigators, peer support networks, community awareness, these reach people that formal systems often miss. And crucially, local initiatives surface the data that makes the invisible visible. If we don't count young adults as a distinct cohort in cancer registries, we cannot advocate for them in policy. So, making the problem legible is itself an act of reducing inequality.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Again, I'm interested to hear, your comments about the social consequences, which aren't perhaps always not what people immediately think about at first off, that sort of these hidden consequences. Thank you. We'll turn now to, as we carry on looking at the different sustainable development goals, we'll look at the goal of quality education and turn to Atir. Atir, this is related to your work in education. We know education plays a critical role in shaping future generations. And from your work in this area, how do you feel that education initiatives help address a broader global challenges such as inequality, gender empowerment, and economic opportunity?
I would say education is a single most effective tool for breaking down systemic inequalities and driving real gender empowerment. It is one of the few spaces where people can actually discover their potential and build confidence to use it. In many cases, which is unfortunate, people cannot experience that kind of freedom in their families, their communities, and sometimes even in their countries. But education can provide that pathway. And I really believe that education initiatives do more than just to, provide opportunities. They give people a chance to show what they are truly capable of, especially when they've spent their lives trying to prove themselves in the society. In my case, I was the first person in my family to ever study abroad, and my family was actually quite hesitant at first. It wasn't just because I'd never traveled alone before, and I'd never traveled besides my country, but also because of the general concerns you can still find when a woman tries to do something new or breaks away from tradition. So it was a huge step for all of us. And at the end of the day, I broke through these barriers, whether it was pushing for gender equality or searching for economic opportunities. And I truly had to fight to prove what I was worth, and I use education as my way to do it. And I would like to give another example from my experience again. I began volunteering at the age of 17 when I started university. I was tutoring English classes to students from marginalized background who could not afford prep courses for their university entrance exams, state exams. And there was actually a big group of volunteers teaching different subjects. Since it was a nonprofit public union, everything was free basically. No, there was not major cost at all to get the program running. And to connect my experience here with the concept you mentioned earlier, Andrew, in the question specifically inequality or economic opportunity, I would say it really came down to a matter of access in this very example, because normally students go to private tutoring, but because of the financial constraints, these families could not afford it. And the tutoring classes that we provided eliminated this gap to a great extent. We also saw another dimension of inequality related to gender. Some girls' parents were not really in favor of their daughters going to university. So many of us had to consult with them and literally try to convince them otherwise by showing the living example of successful women. So this exact education initiative also contributed to gender empowerment, because most of the girls were ultimately admitted to university and could finally pursue their dreams. And people have this misconception. They often believe that without, constant huge funding initiatives cannot last, but we proved that's not true. The project was sustainable because it ran for many years, and it created a cycle where former students returned as teachers to mentor the next generation. And it was also deeply inclusive at the same time because we removed financial barriers that usually keep marginalized people out. So the lesson here is that we don't always need a massive budget to create a real change. Sometimes what we need is the shift in the mindset. And when we stop seeing education as luxury and start seeing it as a basic right, we don't just support one person, we can actually change the path of entire community or entire society even. And when people see these barriers can be broken, it encourages the next generation believe that they can do the same. And this is essentially how opportunity gradually becomes something normal and accessible for everyone.
That's lovely. Thanks, Satya, for that example. And again, we hear from you actually the talking about mentors. So, somebody else who sort of had seen the importance of mentors and mentorship, and also role modeling. Sounds like, so the role models there and people seeing role models and your own experience of being the first in your family to go on to higher education. Let's turn to the goal of gender inequality, and CJ. So I'll ask you to come in on this one because your work focuses on tackling gender inequality and promoting women's empowerment. Could you share how your initiative has helped raise awareness or create a tangible change in your community, CJ? What challenges did you, and once you've done that, maybe give us a sense of what challenges you encountered on the way?
Great question, Andrew. And this is going to sound a little bit taboo, but I'm just going to say it. So one thing I learned from my SDG 5 journey is there are certain, I mentioned earlier about essential wear. So there are certain categories that even the government or a lot of the grassroots do not want to touch because it's a little bit sensitive. And in my, as I was doing a lot of ground up initiatives with SDG 5, mainly on, for example, mentoring young girls and ensuring that they're ready for, things like internship application, job interviews. These are more kind of evergreen generic issues. One of the female founder that I approached, that I met in my constituency for grassroots, she actually owns a underwear company, right? And she was the one that told me that a lot of people don't know that women from low income households, even in Singapore, they can't afford, underwear, essentially. And one thing I also learned is that on average, women's underwear is more expensive than men. And also, women from these backgrounds would be very reluctant to share that they cannot afford essential wear. And when she actually mentioned things like, in Singapore, she couldn't find any avenue of where these women are because, there's no voice. And when she tried to do international aid, to places like South Africa or Philippines, they either want to tax her or they want to they just accept the shipments, but they don't tell her where it ends up. So they could essentially be reselling her products without her knowing in the first place. And that's where, even though I was initially a little bit uncomfortable and awkward to tackle this issue, but I think the change maker spirit in me say, I think we can do better than that. I've got the context and I think we can do better. And so what I did next is I locate one of my Alumni UK member who happens to be executive director of Ray of Hope, this amazing charity. I think it's the only crowdfunding charity in Singapore, and they focus on people that fall in the cracks. So this is people who are like stateless, who transnational couples who don't have citizens' rights, you name it, they support it, And so they were able to find a lot of these, not just women, but also, for example, certain marginalized groups like transgendered, sex workers, and so forth that really oftentimes being overlooked. And what we're doing right now is we are creating not just an event where these lower income women or beneficiaries have essential wear sponsored by the company. We're also doing a panel discussion where female founders can actually share with the government, because we do have an MP, a female MP on the panel, to really share about what are the underlying root causes that led these women to suffer and how can the government support, put that into parliament. I think more importantly, how can women across all different sectors come together to support, be it women from the public sector, the private sector, and the charity? How can we create more effective collaboration to see the changes and to have the bravery to tackle these issues that are oftentimes either overlooked or too sensitive to talk about?
Yeah, thanks, CJ. That's really interesting. And of course, I know we've sort of from your point of view of sort of the panel and when you're sort of focusing on gender inequality, and of course we kind of see that cuts across so many different areas. We've heard from Salah, we've heard from Urvashi as well, the issue from both from the health and the income, if you like, perspective. It still hits, of course, women in a much harder than it hits men. And I'm interested, as you kind of focus in on a very specific area of sort of female apparel and essential wear. This reminds me of Ashi's point about, perhaps having a local focus and having a specific sort of data set or focusing on some of these sort of areas that are unseen otherwise, unless you dive into perhaps a small scale and go into the detail, you're not necessarily aware of that there is an issue, and then it becomes visible. We're just going to go to one more focus on a different sustainable development goal from Rowan, and then we will take some questions and answers from people who are joining us online. Rowan, your goal has been focused on decent work and economic growth. And we know that economic opportunity and access to decent work are essential for sustainable development. Through your Alumni UK funded project, how are you helping individuals or communities access better opportunities, and what impact have you seen so far?
All right, thank you, Andrew. So from the beginning, from the get-go, since I became an ambassador almost 2 years ago, I focused on one key barrier to decent work, not just the lack of jobs, but the lack of access to clear, practical guidance on how people can get jobs. I was unemployed twice, and I know how hurtful and how long and how difficult unemployment could be. So I decided that I would approach this SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth in 4 ways. So the first way I already mentioned, which is direct reach through content. Long before I became an ambassador, for the past 7 years now, I have been posting entry-level jobs, mainly at the international level, almost daily on my LinkedIn. My reach now has exceeded 2.6 million views. I grew a network of close to 60,000 people. And my approach is not just sharing information, but rather activating people to take action themselves. So this weekend, I'm meeting a young South African girl for coffee who's visiting Egypt, who actually applied for a job that I had shared, and she's vacationing in Cairo. I was rather disappointed when people thought that the mosquito coat was Nelson Mandela, because Nelson Mandela for sure would have freed that mosquito. Um, Number two, I focused on events, both online and in-person capacity building. So I did 4 sessions with the British Council in Egypt. I posted the YouTube links in the chat if anyone's interested to learn more. The sessions, more than 500 people attended them from all over the world, and they focused on topics, again, sharing information on key topics such as using AI in job searches, how to apply for a job at the UN and be successful in an interview, how to write a CV for impact, not just showing the work that you've done, and building a career identity. The third thing that I'm doing currently with the British Council is, as an ambassador, I received a grant, an SDG grant of 7,000 sterling pounds, which I have used every single pound of to create the Girl from LinkedIn. So the project, as I said, has 2 components, a workbook and an AI tool, and both these tools will be free. And it doesn't mean that they're free, that they're done poorly, or that you will not get high quality off of them. They're free because the British Council supported this project and a lot of hard work was put into it. And I can't wait to share it with all of you. The final thing that I'm doing is on the 17th of April, I'm actually running a race, a 5 kilometer race to promote awareness on decent work and economic growth. So if you are in Cairo, please come join me. It will be in the British University in Cairo, supported by the university and the British Embassy. Running is not something that I'm comfortable with, but it's something that I'm very passionate about employment, and it's something that I truly want to spread awareness about so that people can get the decent work that they deserve. So please join me. And I can't wait to share my project with all of you.
That's great. Who would have thought it? There you go, an invitation for everyone to get to Cairo to run 5 kilometers. Congratulations to you for that initiative. Good luck with that when it comes around. Thank you for that. Let's dive in very soon to some questions and answers, because there have been quite a few coming in through on the question and answer panel, and there's still time for people to post some more in. Just before we do that, can we just have the third poll or set of questions coming up, just to get a sense from everybody who's joining us? What do you think? If you had to choose, it's maybe an impossible choice, but if you have to choose, which are the Sustainable Development Goals which are most relevant or important to you, either through your work or your interest, where do you rank them? So, or which one would you choose? That poll is just carrying on there in the background for a minute. You're getting some good responses there. We'll just probably end it there for now. So that's good. So it's interesting. There's a lot of interest in education. Well, across the board, actually, quite a good split. Education, equalities, economic growth. I think the what I'm kind of picking up from the comments that you've made, panelists, today, of course, is the intersection between these sustainable goals and the cross section, how many things overlap, because they have to be divided into individual sort of titles to make sense of them and to try to tackle them. But actually, in practice, there are a lot of overlapping challenges and inequalities across different sustainable goals. So we'll dive into some questions. We've got about 10 minutes or so for some questions, and luckily I've got them on the screen sort of with based on sort of the ones which are most popular. So we'll start first of all with the the question that's sort of been most popular. The question is that global sustainable development goal frameworks are clear, but local realities can be very different, as we've heard from you. So how can organizations adapt to markets where economic needs where the immediate economic needs take priority over long-term development goals? So I suppose I'm imagining this really refers to people who have very specific day-to-day needs that focus attention on that, when actually, there are the important but not necessarily the urgent things coming through. I don't know. I wonder if we might look at that from perhaps bring in Urvashi. Can I ask you to sort of have a go at from a health perspective, particularly as you said, health is often invisible. How do you make that sort of get its place in priority?
Yeah, in fact, when I saw that question, I was just thinking that describes pretty much everything I have done and I continue to do in public health, because public health, by its very nature, is about preventing things even before they happen. And those kind of things can be very hard to make tangible, to really make them political priorities. So it's a constant struggle. But like I said, it's very important to be able to reflect the realities, both through numbers, but also through actual lived experience sharing. I think that is very important. When somebody who's actually gone through it or is going through something is able to come to the table and speak about it, it's always very different. No matter how much, somebody else might have been formally educated about a particular issue, it's very different when you have to go through it yourself. So I think it has to be a combination of that data, those numbers, but also ultimately the human beings behind those numbers, and raising the profile of these issues, advocating through young people. I think young people are a very powerful instrument for trying to bring about this change. So I think it's hard work. There's no easy answers that I have to this, but it's hard, sustained, persistent efforts, while really engaging with people who can champion your cause. I think finding those champions in the system, whoever they are, at whatever level they are, is also very important, because you can't do everything by yourself, obviously. So I think those are some of the things that have helped me to make something which is invisible or under-addressed, bring it more onto the agenda. But it's ongoing work, it's hard work. So yeah, no easy answers there.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yes, I think we'd be amazed if there were easy answers. But it's good to have your perspective on that. And maybe I can ask the same question to Salah, because it strikes me from what you were saying about the training that you've done with women in AI, that maybe there might be a sense for people to say, well, I haven't got time to get stuck into this course or to learn some new technology. I've got more priorities today, which are more important. So Salah, do you want to come in and say, how did you sort of address that question about encouraging the focus on sort of the longer term goal?
Yes. Actually, that's a very good aspect of the whole initiative and the projects that I have conducted. Of course, I have to say here one word of very big thank you to my team at the Well City of Science and Technology, my research team, who have helped me a lot, actually, in order not only to prepare the training material and program material in general, but also they helped me a lot in order to promote the very, very important aspects and elements of this training programs. The message that we wanted to deliver to people in Egypt and in Africa, Middle East in general, is how important is AI, not only today in order to learn new things and help you to find a job, not only this, but also more importantly is AI is the trend of the future. In a nutshell, if you don't know AI and you don't master AI tools and technology, it will be really extremely difficult and to land a very good job in the future, no matter how is good level of education that you have received. And this element, actually, we use the resources in the Well City. British Council and Cairo team, actually, they offer me a very big level of help in order to promote this idea. The second aspect is we didn't want actually to prepare at the beginning a very well scientific, or let me say very detailed AI program around certain area, but actually more importantly, we tried as much as we can to make it more understandable by laymen, housewives, and young people, old people, and sort of general sort of community in order to appreciate at least the importance and vitality of learning about AI. Through this, actually, we have also prepared some initiatives in order to be sent out to the policymakers in Egypt who are responsible for education in order to make AI as an essential course for people in schools and also for students in the university. And I have to say that we're almost halfway through of convincing them that this is really an excellent vehicle in order to enable the future students to be capable with AI essential tools and knowledge.
Thank you very much for that. We've got another question about which I think is interesting about partnerships and working in partnerships. And it's clear, I know, Salah, your own examples are clearly working with a team and working in collaboration with communities. There's a lot of partnership work there. And CJ, you've talked a lot about the partnerships that you've developed to kind of getting voices heard and speaking. So maybe CJ, I can ask you first of all to address this question, which is that sometimes, people can talk about partnerships and get partners together, but there's a difference between that and actually having genuine partnerships that deliver and aren't symbolic. Do you want to try and attempt at that question, sort of what makes a partnership really deliver?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. I think finding a great partner is really difficult. It's like in entrepreneurship, we talk about co-founders as well. Funny enough, one thing I learned is that most startups fail because of co-founder breakups. So talking about this, finding a great partner who can effectively not only deliver but also have the right mindset with you is super crucial. And one thing I kind of like to do is kind of look at their track records, see what they are passionate about. Because if they're truly passionate about a cause, like say, for example, like a certain SDG, their LinkedIn or their Instagram will have events, or the stories will have a lot of volunteering kind of pictures of them being dedicated to this cause, right? So this is one of the good track record I would like to see, before I select a partner. And then I think number two is, I think it's also really important to also have that crucial conversation before you start anything with a partner, to kind of know like what you want to achieve together, what you can bring to the table, and the common cause, So what I think one last thing I really want to advocate and strengthen is that oftentimes when people talk about volunteerism, sometimes they feel that just because they do it for free, they don't have to be as serious as a salary job. Whereas for me, it's like if you are taking your voluntary work less serious than your work, it tells me a lot about your character, first of all. And I think any effective change maker that I've met, they treat it as serious as any paid or unpaid gig, because it's a matter of principle. So that's kind of like my 2 cents in terms of selecting a great partner to work with.
Great, thank you so much, CJ, for that. I've got one eye on the time at the moment because I know we're sort of the clock is against us and we're ticking through, and I'm keen to see if we can just address a couple of other questions that have come through quickly before we have to wrap up. There's one question there which I thought raises an interesting question about scale. And I'm immediately, when you were giving your introductions, and it's immediately struck by some of the what feels like impressive immediate scale that your programs have worked on. But Rowan, perhaps I can address this to you because, it feels like, you've got the power of LinkedIn harnessed, or, a big opportunity to reach so many people. Rowan, how would you answer the question of, how do you make programs scalable when they start small? How do you make it scalable?
My answer is kind of paradoxical, actually. If you want to make something scalable, I would say build it as if you're building it for one person. Have a key audience, one person that you're focused on, one certain problem and then go from there. If you try to make it scalable from the get-go, as long as you have the data that an actual problem exists and you have a target audience, a target market, and you're focusing on one key problem, and then you expand from there, I think you're starting from a clear problem and you are creating a solution for a problem that exists for an audience that needs it rather than the other way around. Often when people think at scale from the beginning, it might be counterintuitive because you might have a huge solution, but you might not have a target audience or a target user for that problem. So I would always say, think of the problem first, a target audience, build it for one person, and then build it, they will come.
That's interesting. I wonder if I can ask Rowan if you, for your observations on this, because of course you're working in the context of a ministry, I think, or institute of education. So there's sort of an opportunity, if the policy is right, to get a scale to that. Do you have, Rowan, do you have any observations on this sort of question about how to make programs scalable?
Do you mean Atir? I think so,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think he's
I beg
addressed
your
to me.
pardon. Yes, of course I do. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yes, yes.
Yeah, no problem. I think the problem here is we are still treating sustainability like a separate piece instead of lens for seeing it, seeing the world through sustainability. And we put it into curriculum, but we mostly made it a subject, like a subject or like a concept to memorize it. And I think if we want to make a real impact, we have to stop boxing it in. It should not be a chapter in a textbook. It needs to be the common thread running everything from math to art. What I personally do and is that I don't treat sustainability as a separate thing, and I don't often talk about sustainability to my students as it is. I'm trying to make them to be exposed to the sustainability concepts rather than just having them memorize sustainability. They then subconsciously they develop awareness about sustainability as they go. And I also think that we need a whole institution approach because you cannot simply teach a circular economy in a school that does not even recycle. So the building itself has to be the first lesson. And I would say that finally we have to trust our educators more, and we need to move away from top-down mandates and give teachers more autonomy to adapt these global goals in their own local context. Because ultimately the goal isn't just a test score, it is about ensuring that learner leaves the system with a critical thinking and the empathy needed to navigate a changing planet.
Oh, thank you for that. That's interesting, isn't it? That importance for sort of scale but flex and flexibility across the board. Thank you. Well, listen, we really are coming towards the end. There's one sort of one bonus question. I would wish I had time to go around all five of you and ask this, but I think I've only got time to ask two of you this last question, which is the advice question. What advice would you give to young people who want to take action and contribute to solving global challenges? It's in a sentence because the clock is ticking. So I'm just, I think, just going to ask two of you if you want, and if you want to pass on this because you don't think that you've got advice in one sentence, please do. But Urvashi, can I come to you? Do you have a sense of, what would you say is your piece of advice for young people?
I think one thing I would say is start with a problem you cannot stop thinking about because sustained impact requires sustained motivation, and motivation is personal. So work on something that you're really passionate about and not just something that seems impressive or fashionable.
Thank you for that. And I'll come to Rawan as well. Do you want to finish us up with your words of advice?
Yes, I would say that when you find your purpose in life, you will find that you've been doing it all along. So find out what it is that you've been doing all along, and that's probably something that you would be able to work on passionately for a long time.
Thank you very much. Follow your heart. I can see lots of hearts coming up in the screen as well. So I think this sort of hit a chord with a lot of people. Well, listen, thank you so much to the panelists. We have to call it an end there. It's really impressive to have your direct experience, and thank you so much for sharing. It's really inspirational to have you on the call, and thank you for your time today. I'm sure it's been fascinating for the people who've joined. Today, we've had over 9,000 people register for this Alumni UK event, many of them joining today, and we want to thank everyone who's joined, also all the organizers and all the panelists from all the sessions who've joined today. A big thank you to everyone. We have to wrap it up there, but thank you for your participation. And until the next time we can gather in an event like this, we wish everybody all the best. Thank you very much.